The day started like any other for Admiral Marcus Thompson. He had just wrapped up a high-profile military conference in Washington, D.C., where leaders from across the armed forces gathered to discuss strategies and advancements. As a decorated Black Navy officer with decades of service, Marcus was no stranger to challenges, both on and off the battlefield. But today wasn't about strategy briefings or tactical meetings. It was simply about heading home to see his family after weeks away. As he walked through the bustling airport, Marcus felt the familiar hum of travelers rushing to catch their flights. Families huddled near departure boards, children tugging at suitcases almost as big as they were. Business people typed furiously on laptops while waiting in line for coffee. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel mixed with the aroma of fast food from nearby kiosks. It was chaotic yet oddly comforting, a reminder of life moving forward, even when things got messy. Marcus carried himself with an unspoken confidence that came from years of leadership and discipline. Though dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, his uniform safely tucked into his carry-on, he exuded authority. People around him seemed to sense it too, giving him subtle nods of respect without realizing why. But Marcus didn't think much about it. For him, this was just another leg of the journey. At Gate 17, the line to board stretched longer than expected. A few passengers grumbled under their breath about delays, but most kept quiet, scrolling through their phones or reading magazines. Near the front of the queue stood a woman who immediately caught Marcus's attention, not because she seemed friendly, but because she radiated entitlement. She wore designer sunglasses perched atop her head and clutched a designer handbag tightly against her chest. Her voice cut sharply through the chatter as she argued loudly with the gate agent. "I deserve to be upgraded," she insisted, her tone dripping with irritation. "There's absolutely no reason I should have to sit in coach." The agent tried to explain politely that all first-class seats were taken, but the woman wouldn't hear it. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, throwing her hands up dramatically. "Some people don't know their place." Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Other passengers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Marcus watched the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and concern. He knew what it meant to feel out of place. In rooms where decisions were made, on ships where tradition outweighed progress, and sometimes even in places as ordinary as an airport. Still, he told himself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just having a bad day. When it was finally Marcus's turn to step up, he greeted the gate agent warmly, handing over his boarding pass with a small smile. But before the agent could scan it, the same woman turned around, eyeing him dismissively. Her lips curled into a sneer as if sizing him up and finding him lacking. "Oh, great," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Another one trying to weasel their way into first class. Her comment landed like a punch, sharp and unexpected. Marcus froze for half a second, his mind racing. Did she really think he didn't belong? Or worse, did she assume he couldn't possibly afford anything better than economy? Before he could respond, though, the gate agent spoke up, confirming what Marcus already knew. His ticket was valid for first class. Yet, instead of relief, the situation took a surprising turn, for reasons neither Marcus nor anyone else saw coming. The woman's sharp gaze lingered on Marcus, her expression a mix of disbelief and thinly veiled disdain. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him more closely now that he dared to step into what she considered her territory. Her designer sunglasses slid down her nose, revealing eyes narrowed with suspicion. "First class," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "Really? You sure about that?" Marcus didn't flinch. He had faced far worse in his lifetime, both subtle jabs and outright hostility, and learned long ago how to keep his composure. But there was something particularly grating about this moment. It wasn't just the woman's tone. It was the way she spoke as though he were invisible, unworthy of acknowledgement beyond her condescending remarks. The gate agent fumbled with Marcus's boarding pass, trying to confirm his seat assignment, but the tension in the air made it hard for anyone to focus. "Oh, come on," the woman continued, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Don't tell me they're letting just anyone into first class these days." Her words dripped with sarcasm, loud enough for nearby passengers to overhear. A few people shifted uncomfortably in line, pretending not to notice, while others exchanged awkward glances. One older man shook his head almost imperceptibly, clearly disapproving of her behavior, but unwilling to say anything. Marcus clenched his jaw ever so slightly, a flicker of frustration crossing his face, before he masked it with practiced calm. He glanced at the gate agent, who looked increasingly flustered under the weight of the situation. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" Marcus asked politely, his voice steady and measured. He didn't raise it, or let anger seep in, but there was a quiet authority behind his words that commanded attention. The woman scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Well, I'm just saying," she drawled, leaning closer to Marcus as if she thought intimidation would work. "Some people need to know their limits. First class isn't exactly affordable for everyone." Her implication was clear. She assumed Marcus couldn't possibly belong in such a premium section. To her, his appearance, his casual clothes, his skin color, was all the evidence she needed to make snap judgments. Nearby, a young college student sitting cross-legged on the floor couldn't help but glance up from his phone. His brow furrowed as he watched the exchange unfold. Something about the scene felt wrong, unfair. Without thinking, he discreetly pulled out his phone and began recording, zooming in on the interaction. If nothing else, he figured it might be worth sharing online later. Social media love drama like this, after all. Meanwhile, Marcus remained unfazed by the woman's comments, though they stung more than he cared to admit. Over the years, he'd grown accustomed to being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed entirely because of how he looked. Early in his career, those moments had fueled his determination to prove himself, to rise above the stereotypes others tried to impose on him. Now, decades later, standing here in this crowded airport, he realized some things never truly changed. The gate agent finally managed to scan Marcus's boarding pass, confirming that yes, he was indeed booked in first class. Yet, instead of resolving the matter, the agent hesitated, looking trapped between protocol and the mounting pressure from the woman's complaints. "Actually," the agent said nervously, glancing at Marcus apologetically, "there seems to be an issue with your seat." "An issue?" Marcus arched an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "What kind of issue?" he asked calmly, his tone betraying none of the irritation simmering beneath the surface. The woman smirked triumphantly, as if vindicated by the news. Clearly, she believed she'd won this round. But Marcus wasn't one to back down easily, not when he knew he was in the right. As the agent scrambled to explain further, Marcus noticed the growing unease among the other passengers. Some leaned forward, eager to hear what would happen next. Others whispered quietly, speculating about whether the airline would side with the rude woman or stick to its policies. Whatever came next, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This encounter was far from over. The gate agent's hesitation hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Marcus watched as the young man behind the counter fumbled with his computer, clicking frantically through screens while sweat beaded on his forehead. "I'm so sorry, sir," the agent stammered, avoiding direct eye contact. "It seems there's been an error. Your seat in first class has been reassigned to another passenger." Marcus blinked once, twice, processing the words but struggling to believe them. He had paid for his ticket in full, upgraded months ago when he booked the flight. This wasn't some last-minute standby situation. It was supposed to be straightforward. Yet here he stood, being told that his rightful place on the plane no longer existed because of someone else's mistake. The rude woman, sensing victory, smirked even wider now, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "See," she said loudly, turning to address not just Marcus, but everyone within earshot. "This is what happens when people try to reach above their station. First class isn't for everyone, you know." Her tone was smug, dripping with superiority as if she personally orchestrated the entire debacle. A ripple of discomfort spread through the line of passengers waiting to board. Some shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Others exchanged glances, silently debating whether to intervene or stay out of it altogether. The college student recording the scene zoomed in closer, capturing every word and gesture. His finger hovered over the record button, ready to capture whatever happened next. Something about this moment felt wrong, like watching a slow-motion car crash unfold before their eyes. Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Let me understand this," he began, leaning slightly toward the counter. "You're telling me that despite purchasing a first-class ticket months ago, I'm being denied access to my seat because of an error." He emphasized the last word, letting it land with quiet authority. The gate agent nodded nervously, clearly overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. "Well then," Marcus continued, his tone unwavering, "what exactly are you going to do to resolve this?" For a moment, the agent looked lost, unsure how to respond. The rude woman seized the opportunity to chime in again, her voice sharp and cutting. "Maybe they'll move him to coach where he belongs," she muttered under her breath, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few people winced at her comment, while others muttered disapprovingly under their breath. Even among strangers, her behavior was crossing a line. The gate agent cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Sir, we can offer you a seat in economy," he suggested hesitantly, gesturing vaguely toward the boarding area, "and perhaps a voucher for future travel." His voice trailed off as he realized how inadequate the offer sounded. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his patience wearing thin. "A voucher?" he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "So your solution is to downgrade me, to give away the seat I already paid for, and throw in a coupon as compensation. Is that correct?" The agent opened his mouth to reply but closed it again, visibly flustered. Behind him, another airline employee approached cautiously, likely sensing the growing tension. Passengers began whispering among themselves, speculating about what would happen next. Would Marcus accept the downgrade quietly, or would he push back? And what about the rude woman? Would anyone call her out for her behavior? As the seconds ticked by, the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with anticipation. Marcus glanced around briefly, noticing the mix of emotions on the faces of those watching. Curiosity, discomfort, anger, even admiration. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let this go without a fight. But how far was he willing to take it? Just then, the second airline employee stepped forward, introducing herself as the supervisor. She offered a nervous smile, clearly aware that this situation had spiraled out of control. "May I assist you, sir?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. Marcus turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For the first time since the ordeal began, a flicker of determination lit up his eyes. Whatever happened next, he knew, would define not only how this story ended, but also how everyone present, including himself, would remember it. The arrival of the supervisor seemed to shift the energy in the room, though not entirely for the better. She was a middle-aged woman with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, her smile polite but strained as she surveyed the scene. It didn't take long for her to realize this wasn't just a simple seating mix-up. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. Passengers were whispering behind cupped hands, phones were held aloft recording every second, and the rude woman stood nearby, arms still crossed, looking smugly satisfied that things were going her way. "Sir," the supervisor began, addressing Marcus directly, "I understand there's been some confusion regarding your seat assignment. Let me assure you we're doing everything we can to resolve this." Her tone was professional, almost rehearsed, but there was an edge of nervousness beneath it. She glanced at the gate agent, who now looked like he wanted nothing more than to disappear into the floor. Marcus nodded once, his expression calm but unreadable. "Thank you," he said evenly, his voice carrying just enough authority to make her straighten up slightly. "As I've explained, I purchased a first-class ticket months ago. Yet here I am being told my seat has been reassigned due to an error. Not mine, mind you, and offered a downgrade without proper resolution." The supervisor hesitated, glancing between Marcus and the computer screen where the gate agent was still clicking through screens. "We'll figure this out, sir," she assured him again, though her words felt hollow even to her own ears. Behind them, the rude woman rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered something under her breath about people making unnecessary scenes. That did it. Something in Marcus snapped, not loudly or explosively, but in a way that radiated quiet power. He turned slowly to face her, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that silenced her mid-mutter. For the first time since the ordeal began, she seemed unsure of herself, her confidence wavering under his unwavering gaze. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his tone clipped but controlled. "Did you say something?" The woman blinked rapidly, caught off guard by his directness. No, she stammered, taking a small step back. "Nothing important." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to the supervisor, who now looked visibly uneasy. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her firmly, "this situation is unacceptable. I paid for a service, and I expect it to be honored. If there's truly an issue—" The supervisor nodded quickly, scribbling notes on her clipboard. "Absolutely, sir. We're reviewing the situation right now." She paused, then added hesitantly, "In the meantime, would you consider allowing us to offer you a complimentary upgrade on your next flight?" It was a weak attempt at damage control, and everyone knew it. The offer hung in the air like a bad joke, met with silence from Marcus and disapproving murmurs from the growing crowd of onlookers. The college student filming the scene zoomed in closer, capturing the tension etched on every face. Even the gate agent winced, clearly aware how insufficient the proposal sounded. Marcus exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thinner by the second. "Let me ask you this," he said, leaning forward slightly. "If I were sitting here in uniform instead of civilian clothes, do you think this conversation would be happening the same way?" The question landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the terminal. The supervisor froze, her pen hovering over her clipboard as she struggled to respond. Nearby passengers exchanged knowing looks, some nodding subtly in agreement. The rude woman shifted uncomfortably, her earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's quiet accusation. Before anyone could reply, a new voice cut through the tension. A middle-aged man standing near the front of the line stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly, pointing at the rude woman. "She's been rude and disrespectful from the start. Don't let her bully this man because she thinks she's entitled to special treatment." His words sparked a chain reaction. Other passengers began chiming in, voicing their support for Marcus and criticizing the airline's handling of the situation. One older woman shook her head and muttered, "Shameful," while a young mother holding her toddler's hand added, "He deserves better than this." The rude woman's face turned bright red, her composure cracking completely. She opened her mouth to argue, but no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned decisively against her, leaving her isolated and exposed. Meanwhile, the supervisor scrambled to regain control, promising Marcus repeatedly that they would fix the issue immediately. But Marcus wasn't done yet. As the chaos swirled around him, he stood tall, his presence commanding respect even in the midst of turmoil. Whatever happened next, he knew. The tension in the terminal was palpable, like a storm ready to break. Passengers who had been mere bystanders moments ago were now fully invested in the unfolding drama, their voices rising in support of Marcus and against the rude woman's behavior. The supervisor, overwhelmed by the mounting pressure, glanced nervously between Marcus, the crowd, and her clipboard. It was clear she needed to act quickly, or risk losing control entirely. Marcus took a step back, his posture calm but commanding. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, their murmurs of encouragement fueling his resolve. For years, he'd faced situations like this, moments where people underestimated him or dismissed him outright because of how he looked. But today felt different. Today, surrounded by strangers who were beginning to see past the surface, he decided it was time to reveal the truth. "Ma'am," Marcus said, addressing the supervisor directly, "I think it's important for you to know exactly who you're dealing with." His voice carried authority, drawing instant silence from the crowd. Even the rude woman stopped fidgeting, her eyes narrowing as if sensing that something significant was about to happen. Reaching into his blazer pocket, Marcus pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted his military ID card, a small rectangle of plastic that held immense weight. Holding it up so the supervisor and nearby passengers could see, he introduced himself. "My name is Admiral Marcus Thompson, United States Navy." The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people processed what they were hearing and seeing. A few passengers leaned forward, craning their necks to get a better look at the ID card. Others whispered among themselves, their tones shifting from curiosity to awe. The rude woman's jaw dropped slightly, her smug demeanor replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The supervisor froze, her pen slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the counter. "Admiral," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're—" "Yes," Marcus confirmed, his tone steady and composed. "I've served my country for over 30 years. And while I don't expect special treatment, I do expect basic respect, and for agreements to be honored." He slid the ID card back into his wallet, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Every gesture spoke of confidence, earned not through arrogance, but through decades of leadership and sacrifice. For a moment, no one moved. The terminal seemed suspended in time, the hum of background chatter replaced by stunned silence. Then, slowly, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Passengers started applauding, not a loud ovation, but a respectful ripple of claps that grew steadily louder. The college student filming lowered his phone briefly, shaking his head in disbelief before resuming his recording. Someone behind Marcus muttered, "This changes everything." The rude woman, however, looked utterly undone, her face flushed red, then pale, as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize or defend herself, but no words came out. Instead, she took a shaky step backward, her earlier bravado evaporating completely. The supervisor snapped into action, her professionalism kicking in despite the whirlwind around her. "Admiral Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with urgency, "please allow me to personally escort you to your seat in first class. We will ensure this is resolved immediately." She gestured toward the jet bridge, motioning for another staff member to take over the boarding process. As Marcus turned to follow her, the crowd parted respectfully, some offering quiet words of admiration. "Thank you for your service," one older man said, his voice thick with emotion. A young mother holding her child's hand nodded vigorously, adding, "We're so sorry you had to deal with this." Even the rude woman tried to interject, stammering an awkward apology as Marcus walked past. But he didn't acknowledge her. There was no anger in his expression, only a quiet dignity that left a lasting impression on everyone present. As he disappeared down the jet bridge, escorted by the supervisor, the terminal buzzed with renewed energy. Conversations erupted everywhere, speculating about what had just happened and marveling at the grace Marcus had shown under pressure. Back at the gate, the rude woman stood alone, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by shame and embarrassment. Nearby passengers glared at her openly now, their disapproval impossible to ignore. One man even approached a nearby airline representative, demanding to file a complaint about her behavior. Within minutes, security arrived to escort her off the plane, a decision met with quiet approval from nearly everyone watching. As the drama unfolded, Marcus settled into his rightful seat in first. As Admiral Marcus Thompson settled into his first-class seat, the weight of the day's events began to ease off his shoulders. The leather seat was plush, the cabin quiet except for the soft hum of engines preparing for takeoff. A flight attendant approached him with an apologetic smile, offering him a complimentary glass of champagne and assuring him that the airline would do everything possible to make up for the earlier fiasco. Marcus accepted the drink graciously, nodding in acknowledgement, but his mind was elsewhere. Down at the gate, chaos still reigned. The rude woman, now escorted by security, stumbled through the terminal as murmurs of disapproval followed her every step. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation openly expressed their disdain, some shaking their heads, others outright glaring. One elderly gentleman muttered loud enough for those around him to hear, "People like her give humanity a bad name." The college student who had recorded the incident uploaded the video online within minutes, adding captions that highlighted the absurdity of the situation. By the time the plane taxied onto the runway, hashtags like #RespectAdmiralThompson and #AccountabilityInAction were already trending on social media. On board, Marcus tried to focus on the positives. He pulled out a book he'd been meaning to read, a biography about leadership, but found himself distracted. His thoughts drifted back to the people at the gate, the way they had rallied behind him when it mattered most. It wasn't just about standing up for him personally. It was about rejecting prejudice and demanding fairness. For a brief moment, strangers had come together to support what was right, and that gave him hope. Meanwhile, news outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Within hours, headlines blared across major networks. Navy Admiral denied first-class seat after racist remarks, and airline apologizes after mishandling veterans' booking. Journalists scrambled to piece together details of the incident, reaching out to passengers who had been present. Many eagerly recounted what they had seen, describing Marcus's calm demeanor and the rude woman's entitled behavior. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from outrage over the discrimination Marcus faced to admiration for how he handled the situation with grace under pressure. The rude woman, whose identity remained unknown to the public, became an instant pariah. Her employer reportedly launched an internal investigation after screenshots of her LinkedIn profile circulated online. Former colleagues came forward, sharing stories of similar encounters where she allegedly displayed condescending or discriminatory behavior. Local news stations camped outside her home, hoping to get a statement, while talk show hosts debated whether her actions reflected broader societal issues. She issued a vague apology via a hastily written email to the airline, claiming she didn't mean any harm, but few believed her sincerity. For its part, the airline went into full damage control mode. Executives held emergency meetings, drafting press releases and planning town halls to address employee training deficiencies. They publicly apologized to Marcus, praising him for his service and promising to implement stricter protocols to prevent such incidents in the future. Free upgrades and travel vouchers were offered to passengers affected by the delay, though many declined, saying they simply wanted accountability rather than perks. Back in first class, Marcus sipped his champagne thoughtfully. While the resolution felt satisfying, he couldn't shake the lingering frustration. He knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern he'd experienced throughout his life. From being overlooked for promotions early in his career to facing skepticism during high-stakes military negotiations, moments like these had shaped him, teaching resilience and patience. But today reminded him that progress, though slow, was possible when people stood together against injustice. As the plane soared higher, Marcus glanced out the window at the clouds stretching endlessly below. The world seemed vast yet interconnected, each person playing a role in shaping its direction. For now, he allowed himself a small sense of victory, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel lesser because of someone else's biases. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but stories like his could spark conversations, inspire action, and remind others that respect should never be conditional. When Admiral Marcus Thompson finally landed at his destination, he expected to slip quietly back into his routine, reuniting with his family, unpacking his carry-on, and preparing for the week ahead. What he didn't anticipate was the avalanche of attention waiting for him as soon as he turned on his phone. Notifications flooded in from every direction: emails, texts, social media messages, even calls from colleagues and friends who had seen the viral video or read about the incident online. The sheer volume of responses overwhelmed him at first. Some messages were simple expressions of gratitude. "Thank you for handling that situation with such dignity." Others shared deeply personal stories of discrimination and bias, thanking Marcus for inspiring them to speak up when they felt wronged. A young woman wrote to say she'd been hesitant to apply for a leadership role because she feared being underestimated, but seeing how Marcus carried himself gave her courage. Another man recounted being denied service at a restaurant due to his race, and thanked Marcus for reminding him that standing firm in the face of injustice mattered. As Marcus scrolled through the messages, he noticed recurring themes: resilience, respect, and the need for systemic change. Many people praised not only his calm demeanor, but also his decision to reveal his rank, not as a flex of authority, but as a way to highlight the absurdity of the assumptions made about him. One message stood out in particular: "You didn't let anger define your response. Instead, you showed us all what true strength looks like." The media coverage continued to grow, too. News outlets reached out for interviews, eager to hear Marcus's perspective on the incident. He agreed to a few, choosing platforms where he felt his voice could make a difference. Sitting down with a well-known journalist, Marcus spoke candidly about the challenges he'd faced throughout his career as a black man in the military. "I've learned over the years that prejudice doesn't always come wrapped in hostility," he explained. "Sometimes it's subtle: a glance, a tone, an assumption. But those small moments add up, shaping how we see ourselves and our place in the world." His words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations about systemic racism and privilege. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #BeLikeAdmiral Thompson and #GraceUnderPressure, encouraging people to reflect on their own biases and behaviors. Teachers used the story in classrooms to discuss respect and accountability, while corporate leaders referenced it during diversity training sessions. Even late-night talk show hosts weighed in, using humor to highlight the ridiculousness of judging someone based on appearance alone. Meanwhile, the rude woman's life unraveled further. Her employer suspended her pending the outcome of their internal investigation, and local businesses reported receiving backlash after she was spotted shopping there. Though some argued that public shaming went too far, others believed her actions warranted consequences. For Marcus, however, the focus wasn't on revenge or punishment. It was about creating awareness. When asked about her during an interview, he simply said, "What happened wasn't about one person. It was about a mindset. My hope is that this moment encourages reflection and growth for everyone involved." By the end of the week, the airline announced sweeping changes to its policies, including mandatory anti-bias training for all employees and clearer guidelines for handling customer disputes. They also established a scholarship fund in Marcus's name to support underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation and aerospace. While Marcus appreciated the gesture, he emphasized that real change required more than symbolic acts. It demanded consistent effort and accountability. As the initial wave of attention began to subside, Marcus found himself reflecting on the broader impact of the incident. It wasn't just about him or the rude woman. It was about the countless individuals who experienced similar injustices daily, often without witnesses or advocates. The outpouring of support reminded him that progress was possible when people chose empathy over indifference. That night, sitting on his porch with a cup of tea, Marcus thought about the passengers who had stood up for him at the gate, their voices rising in unity, refusing to stay silent. In that moment, he realized something profound. Change didn't happen because of one person acting alone. It happened when communities came together, amplifying each other's voices and demanding better. And if his story could inspire even a fraction of that kind of unity, then maybe, just maybe, it would leave the world a little brighter than he found it. In the weeks that followed, Admiral Marcus Thompson's story became more than just a viral moment. It evolved into a symbol of resilience and dignity. People from all walks of life continued to reach out, sharing how his actions had inspired them to confront their own biases or stand up against unfair treatment. Schools incorporated his story into lessons on leadership and integrity, while community organizations invited him to speak about overcoming adversity with grace. Though Marcus never sought the spotlight, he embraced the opportunity to spark meaningful conversations. The airline, eager to rebuild trust, launched an ambitious campaign called Respect in Action, aimed at fostering inclusivity both within its workforce and among passengers. Posters featuring Marcus's quote, "Respect isn't earned by rank. It's given freely when we choose to see each other as equals," were displayed prominently in terminals worldwide. Employees underwent rigorous training programs designed not only to address bias, but also to empower staff to intervene in situations like the one Marcus experienced. The scholarship fund named after him gained significant traction, attracting donations from individuals and corporations alike. Within months, dozens of students received financial aid to pursue careers in aviation, many of whom came from underrepresented backgrounds. For Marcus, the true measure of success wasn't in headlines or policies. It was in the small, everyday changes people began making. Strangers told him stories of standing up for coworkers who were being treated unfairly. Families discussed his example around dinner tables, teaching children the importance of treating others with kindness and respect. Even the rude woman's downfall served as a cautionary tale, prompting discussions about accountability and the harm caused by unchecked privilege. While Marcus didn't revel in her misfortune, he acknowledged that her public embarrassment underscored the need for reflection and growth, not just for her, but for society as a whole. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Marcus returned to his duties with quiet determination. He remained committed to mentoring young officers, emphasizing that leadership wasn't about titles or uniforms, but about character and action. "You'll face moments where you're underestimated," he often told them. "But remember, your response defines you far more than anyone else's assumptions ever will." At home, his family marveled at the impact of the incident. His teenage daughter proudly showed him memes created by her classmates, depicting him as a superhero fighting injustice. His wife teased him gently about becoming an internet sensation, but couldn't hide her pride in how he'd handled everything with such composure. Together, they reflected on the irony of the situation. After decades of service, Marcus found himself celebrated not for a battlefield victory or strategic triumph, but for something far simpler: his unwavering humanity. As time passed, the intensity of the media coverage faded, but the ripple effects lingered. Conversations about bias and respect became part of the cultural fabric, encouraged by Marcus's example. Social media campaigns inspired by his story prompted businesses, schools, and communities to reevaluate their practices. People began asking harder questions. How can we create spaces where everyone feels valued? What does it mean to truly listen and learn from one another? Marcus knew the fight for equality and fairness was far from over. There would always be new challenges, moments where progress felt frustratingly slow. But he took solace in knowing that change started with awareness. And sometimes, a single moment could ignite a movement. For every person who watched the video, read the articles, or heard his interviews, there was potential for transformation. On a quiet evening months later, Marcus stood on the porch of his home, gazing at the stars. He thought about the passengers who had supported him at the gate, the strangers who had reached out with kind words, and the students now pursuing dreams made possible by the scholarship fund. Each of them carried a piece of this story forward, shaping its legacy in ways he might never fully see. And though Marcus didn't consider himself extraordinary, he understood one thing clearly: by choosing to act with dignity and purpose, even in the face of disrespect, he had reminded the world of something profound. That true strength lies not in power or authority, but in the courage to rise above hatred and lead with compassion. As the night breeze whispered through the trees, Marcus smiled softly, content in the knowledge that his actions had planted seeds of hope, seeds that would continue to grow long after the headlines had faded.